nirasya sarva sandeham akikritya sudarshanam prakashita rahasyam tam bhajami gurumishwaram. Itam Shri Radhika Prana Nata Pada Sarojayo Yena Premanubhutyasha Dattam Tam Shri Gurum Bhaje. Shri Govinda Pararavinda Marupananya Vilashojitan Purna Prema Rasotsavo Jalamano Vritti Prasannananan Shajvad Krishna Katha Mahamrita Payora Shomudake Dato Vande Bhagavatani Mananudabam Murdnani Patyakshito. Namah Shri Guru Krishnaya Nirupadi Kripa Krite Ya Shri Chaitanya Rupa Bhut Tanvan Prema Rasam Kalo Jayatam Surato Pangor Mama Mandamater Gati Matsarvasva Parambujo Radha Madana Mohano Adadanastrinam Dantoir Yacheham Puna Puna Srimad Rupa Parambujo Dhyudisyam Janma Janmani Abhirapali Patiputra Kanta Dasya Bilashati Balashvavara Sri Rupa Chintamala Sapti Sangsto Durdantamadzvantahai Churastam Raganugami Bhajanola Samanasanam Shri Radhaya Sahasara Samaratam Brajendum Shri Rupa Parakamala Shrita Cheta Samme Chittam Satam Marukari Yatupada Padme Ya Bhakti Nikilarta Varga Janani Ya Brahma Sakshat Krite Anandatishaya Pradavishaya Jat Sukyat Vimuktir Jaya Shri Radha Ramana Param Bhajo Yugam Yasya Mahanashrayo Yakur Ya Brajalokavat Gurutara Premnaiva Tasyai Namah Ya Ramya Nikila Ghashanga Shamani Shrotra Tritim Sangata Ya Rasikai Sukabdi Janani Dhikarya Mukti Spriham Ya Dhyata Hridaye Vrajendra Tanuja Premamrita Syandini Saji Yad Hari Bhakta Vrinda Mohita Dhanyeha Padyavali. So by the grace of Sri Kali Yuga Pavana, the Svabhajana Vibhajana, Prayojana Avatar Prema Purushottam, Karuna Mahasagar Shri Gauranga Mahaprabhu, and his beloved Parshad, the crest jewel of Gaudiya Vaishnava Acaryas, the fulfiller of his heart's desire, Sri Rupa Gosvami Pad. Again today we'll continue our discussion of Padyavali, and in particular we'll resume in this section on Sotsukya Prarthana, prayers filled with eagerness on the part of Bhaktas. And in our last reading, we went through two prayers of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, and in the latter of the two, he said that he wants only to drink with his ears the nectar of Krishna's flute, or the sound, the music of his flute, and he's not even interested in talk of nirvana. So we heard how the bliss of bhakti includes and surpasses all bliss that can potentially be experienced in nirvana. And thus, one who has an experience of it or has conviction in that depth of experience that one can have within it, fosters no further interest in discussion of mere nirvana, which could be taken to mean sayujya mukti or to be taken as any type of mukti. So in our discussion in the commentary, we went through lastly a couple of verses, one from the Venu-gita, one of Rupa Gosvami, which is cited in the Charitamrita, in praise of the sound of Krishna's flute. So here, as Rupa Gosvami is citing this couple of verses that speak about Krishna's flute, then we have a couple of verses that he cites to illustrate this quality of his flute song. So today we'll continue discussion of that with some additional citations from Rupa Goswami's Stava-mala, specifically the Govinda Viradavali, which are cited by Vishnudas Goswami in his commentary on the Ujjal Nilamani. And in particular in the opening chapter of the Ujjal Nilamani, where Krishna is being described, the alambana vibhava of, or the Vishaya alambana vibhava of Madhura Rasa or Ujjal Rasa. And as his qualities, characteristics, and so forth are being surveyed, then one of them is the mention of him being an extraordinary flute player or producing extraordinary flute music. So Vishnudas Goswami, in his comment on that statement in the Ujjal Nilamani, cites these other verses from Rupa Goswami himself that further illustrate the charm of Krishna's flute playing. So we'll spend a little time with these before moving on to the next verse here in Padyavali. So I'm picking up from the middle of the previous file where I left off last time, and we will go. So the first of these is as follows. So he says, Tava muralī-dvani-ramari kamam buddhi bridi shubhrang shuhu achatula gokula kulaja that might be a typo. Daryam buddhi panakumbajo jayati. Okay, I'll have to check that later. Anyway, he says, the sound of your flute, the bright-rayed moon for swelling the ocean of the ladies of Svarga's desire, the Agastya for drinking the ocean of the composure of the unwavering ladies of Gokula, triumphs. So the moon is well known to create swells in the ocean, especially if you grew up in a beach town, you're well acquainted with this. So as the ocean causes the moon causes the ocean to swell, so also then the sound of Krishna's flute is causing the ladies of Svarga's desire to swell. So this is likely inspired by statements in the Venu-gita as well as the Yugal-gita, where the gopis themselves, in their mind's eye, perceive the ladies of Svarga becoming spellbound as they hear Krishna playing the flute and showering flowers down upon them, and so on and so forth. And then here there's a reference to Agastya Muni, who is known to have, by the power of his tapasya or his siddhi, drunk the whole of the ocean. So it is said that he reached down with his palm and swallowed the whole of the ocean. So referring to that, then as Agastya has the power to drink the whole ocean, then the sound of the flute has the power to drink up, or in other words, deprive the gopis of their composure, even though they are unwavering noble ladies. So, as we referred to last time, there's an important description in the Priti Sandarbha of the dharmic character of the Braja Gopis, which is important to understand in order to grasp the significance of statements like this that describe how Krishna's flute or Krishna's beauty or love for Krishna can cause them to even let go of that adherence to dharma and social convention for the sake of serving Krishna, for the sake of pleasing Krishna. So that is also alluded to here by describing their composure as an ocean. He's both praising the greatness of their dignity as well as the power of the sound of the flute to eclipse that, so to speak. So this is one description. Then I'll come to the second one. Let me see here. Where do I have the... Just let me pull up the... Okay, here it is. Buddhinam parimohana kidahriyam uchatanastambhano dharmu dagrabeyam mana karitinam vashyatam nishpadanaha kalindi-kalahang sahantavapusham akarshana subhravam jiyadvainava panchama dhvanimayo mantradhirajastava. So this is a grand description. He says, O swan on the Kalindi. So he's speaking of Krishna like this. O swan, or O frolicker on the Kalindi, beguiling the thoughts, causing the abandonment of the shyness, paralyzing the mighty fear on account of dharma, and accomplishing the subjugation of the elephant-like minds, and drawing near the bodies of they of fine brows, namely the gopis, may the emperor of mantras, constituted of the fifth note of your flute, triumph. So, with difficulty, I refrained from putting extensive discussion of these verses with reference to Baladeva Vidyabhushan's commentary on the Stava-mala, but in the footnotes I couldn't help but add a few, but I just thought if I start writing commentary on the verses that are cited in the commentary on the main verse, then things will just get too elaborate. But a few of these points are worth noting, so just while we're discussing it here, I'll just share a few of the things I have in the footnotes. So when the sound of the flute, or the fifth note of the flute, is said to be beguiling the thoughts of the gopis, then Sri Vidyabhushan comments that the thoughts of the gopis referred to here are those based on the conviction that devotion to the husband is the highest dharma. Or in other words, that it is, of great importance or of paramount necessity for them to remain chaste and engaged in attention to the husband, that such thought becomes beguiled by the sound of Krishna's flute. It becomes interrupted or somehow no longer so clear. And secondly, causing the abandonment of the shyness of the gopis. Then Vidyabhushan says the shyness of the gopis referred to here, that the shyness of the Braja gopis referred to here, is the hesitation they feel, quote, how can we go to meet him during the day when others might see us? So this implies that they become so anxious to see him that even the importance of doing so discreetly somehow becomes less important, or somehow they're, what in English we have this phrase, reckless abandon, or they're so much enchanted that they even become reckless in regard to maintaining the discretion that otherwise they would be very attentive to sustaining. So in that way, it's saying, cause the abandonment of their shyness, meaning he takes it thus that the shyness here refers to the shyness they feel in being potentially caught going out to have a tryst with Krishna. And then, one more note I have here is that Sri Vidyabhushan notes that in this verse, Sri Rupa describes how the fifth note in a raga, played by Sri Krishna's flute, accomplishes all five of the effects mantras are culturally understood in traditional societies to be capable of causing, namely beguilement, mohana, abandonment of one's occupation or other beneficial practice, or another beneficial practice, uchatana, immobility or paralysis, stambhana, subjugation, vashikarana, and attraction, akarshana. The fifth note of Sri Krishna's flute is described in the verse as the emperor of all mantras because it produces all five of these effects simultaneously on the same target, the Braja Gopis. So you can find throughout classical Sanskrit literature, as well as in tantric works, and as well as in, the consultations of, tantrics even of today, where mantras are understood to be able to produce these different types of effects. And I've given the list of 5 here that Baladev Vidyabhushan gives. In other texts, you can find slight variegation in what these 5 are, but they're all relatively similar. Some are used for attraction, or in other words, if someone wants to cause someone else to fall in love with them, then they may approach a tantric to cast a spell, so to speak, or use a particular mantra. If they want to somehow exert control over someone or cause someone to do their bidding, then they have also what they call bashikaran, or this means of exerting some control. They also have mantras that can cause paralysis, or in other words, cause someone to become stunned, or beguiled, bewildered, or to uchatana is perhaps the most peculiar. They have ones that are defined as mantras that can be cast upon someone that causes them to give up the way that they make money, or the way that they engage in their occupation for their own livelihood. So it would, in other words, be some way of sabotaging another person. So, although, even in today's society, in Bengal, you can see on billboards and train walls, sticker posters and advertisements for tantrics who offer all of these things and say, 100% guarantee or your money back, Bashikaran, Akarshan, etc. You can see this in, trains any day of the week in West Bengal and perhaps other parts of India, I don't know. Classically and still today, there's a belief in the power of mantras to have these effects. So based on this, Rupa Goswami has written a poem here describing Krishna's flute as because it's also a sound that is heard, and because it also, can attract and charm and bewilder persons, as is shown in the Venu Gita and the Yugal Gita, where the cows and bulls are said to have been chewing their cud, but when they hear the flute, freeze as though they're unable to move, and the rivers that are flowing are caused to stop or flow backwards, and in other words, the mobile entities are caused to become immobile entities are caused to become mobile. In this way, so many wonderful transformations are produced by the sound of the flute, praised by none other than the gopis in the, as I said, in the Venu Gita and the Yugal Gita. So compressing the gist of those things into this statement, then he's saying that the sound of the flute is like the emperor of mantras. And specifically, he highlights the 5th note of the flute, and my simple understanding of that, perhaps there's Further, the commentator doesn't address it here, but my understanding of that is that in music, generally, in Western music, they have what they call the perfect fifth, or the harmony between the tonic and the fifth note is typically the richest and most significant harmony within the scale. So compositions and ragas and instrumental playing that highlights and emphasizes the contrast and the different notes throughout the ragas will typically center or feature ultimately, emphasis on the fifth note that brings out the sweetest harmony within the raga or within the scale. So to say that this mantra of the Emperor of Mantras is the fifth note of the flute is, to my knowledge, as if to say that not only the song as a whole, but as he's playing his flute song, when in the course of his movement through the raga and his highlighting and stressing of different parts, he comes to that sort of peak moment when the harmony with the fifth note is emphasized and the essence of the harmony within the raga emerges, or the richest sound of the song comes out, that has this ultimate fivefold effect. I believe is something the way the Rupa Goswami envisions the verse to be conceived. So that's the second one. Now for a third one, which uses humor and some clever double meaning of words and parallel construction in Sanskrit. So the next one, he says, Ranayati hare tavaveno naryo dhanujascha kapita kinaha vanamanapekshita dayita karabalan proja dhavanti. O Hari, when your flute resounds, women, namely the gopis, begin trembling and perspiring out of love, become unaware of their husbands, drop the hair in their hands they were braiding, and run to the forest to meet you. Asuras also begin trembling and perspiring out of fear of death, become unaware of their wives, drop the swords in their hands they have raised for battle, and run to the forest to hide from you. So this is quite a clever composition. If you look at the text in Sanskrit itself, you can see it's quite short, but the translation is quite long. So the way it's done is that the words narya, or women, and danujas, or asuras, or danujas, are two subjects, and then the rest of the modifiers and the verb in the sentence are read to in parallel construction as describing or expressing what both of these agents are doing. And because the plural forms are used, then the Rupa Goswami chooses words that have the same case endings in plural masculine and feminine, so that they can both go for either subject. And then the word karabalan he uses intentionally in a way that has a double meaning, because karabalan can mean swords in the sense of kara meaning hand, so karabalan can mean that is a word for a sword, or a weapon that's held in the hand. And then also the word balan can also refer to hair. So karabalan can also mean hair in hand. So in that way, it becomes a way of describing the gopis or asuras. So you have this kind of ultimate contrast. If you think of some asura with a sword in his hand ready to fight to the death, and you think of a gopi braiding her hair to prepare herself for a tryst with Krishna. This is about as, pratikul and anukul. This is about as extreme on the two different spectrums as you could possibly be. So to use the verb and the other qualifiers in the sentence to be able to simultaneously describe both of them, the two that are otherwise the most opposite. This creates quite a humorous contrast. So I've got a few points from Baladevi Dibhushan. He says that this verse is composed with an ornament of double meaning, is not a case of rasa bas. In other words, since the Shringar and Bhayanaka rasas, or this reference to Madhura rasa as well as the secondary rasa of Bhayanaka, or something gruesome or something that evokes abhorrence, meaning the asuras, described in the verse, have different substrata. In other words, although both rasas are in the verse, because it's a parallel construction where there's no combination of the two directly together, then it's not rasabas. Even though typically anywhere that Bhayanaka and Shringa are mixed, you get the effect of rasabas, according to Rupa Goswami's Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Here Rupa Goswami himself is writing this and evidently doesn't consider it a case of rasabas because he's not implying the presence of anything Bhayanaka in the vessels of the Shringar rasa, but rather parallel to and yet separate from. And finally, is suggestive of the flute's wondrousness by virtue of its accomplishing two completely different tasks simultaneously. So it's as if, some, persons, seeking to kill Krishna at the bidding of Kamsa or something like this are as though sneaking up to catch him in the forest while he's up to no good in their mind. And he is there, perhaps in the way that the previous verse from one of the earlier classes said, the kunja is fully decorated, his cloth is finely draped about him, he's taken up the flute, and although these asuras are approaching with their swords to kill him, and the gopis are all busy doing their tasks at home, all he has to do is play the flute. And simultaneously the gopis drop their hair as they're braiding it and come running to him. And the asuras, who are already coming running to him, to attack him, run off in the other direction in fear. And the gopis arrive to him without any disturbance from anyone. Perhaps something like this is one way that it can be conceived. So effortless mastery on the part of Brajendra Nandan. Okay, then let's look at one more. So this is coming to 37 in the Govinda Viranavali. Sambhrantai shasharanga-patam abhito veder muda-vandita simanto parigauravad upanishad Devi bhirapyarpita anamran pavane pranavena cha pranayato hrishthatmana bhishtuta mridvite murali rutir muraripo sharmani nirmatuna. So he says, bowed to on all sides by the reverent Vedas, accompanied by their 6 limbs. Placed out of veneration atop the part in the hair, even by the Devis of the Upanishads, and highly praised out of admiration by bowing pranava, meaning the syllable om, with a rejoicing mind. O enemy of Mura, may the gentle sound of your flute create delight for us all. So the Vedas, the Upanishads, and Om are classically conceived as Om, the Vedas, which are, the Shruti, what is heard, and the Upanishads, which are considered the ultimate aspect of the Shruti, or the ultimate expression of Om, or the finest things that can be heard from the classic viewpoint of adoration of the Vedic literature. then here he's describing the sound of Krishna's flute as superior even to the Vedas, even to the Upanishads, even to Omkar. So this is another way of exalting the Krishna's flute, specifically the sonic aspect of it as superlative. So by saying that the Vedas bow accompanied by their angas, this is also clever in the sense that when one prostrates, they perform what you call a panchanga or a shastanga pranam. So it's customary to do, a pranam, quote unquote, with angas, and then the Vedas are also known to have these 6 subsidiary aspects of etymology and pronunciation and jyotish and so on. So the Vedas are also known to have angas, and pranams are also known to have angas. So then to say that the Vedas with the shadangas, or with their 6 angas, perform this pranam, is sort of a play upon the idea of a panchanga or a shashtanga pranam, and as a way, and incorporates the notion of the Vedas being possessed of 6 limbs. So this is clever. And then the Upanishads are compared to Devis, or goddesses, and then as it's customary for Devis or women in general to place some mark, some sidur or something there in as part of worship for the well-being of the husband and in honor of their commitment to their matrimonial relationship and so on, then for the Upanishads to place the sound of Krishna's flute at that place as though to say that they take the dust of the flute's feet upon their head, or that they adore the flute as, what they, cherish as an object of veneration. And finally, as Om is known to be, reverberated widely, than to say that even Om itself praises the sound of the flute, then this conveys that the sound of Om is the very essence of all revelation, is the very essence of the fundamental affirmation that all revelation seeks to elaborate on, or seeks to convey into the hearts of people, as the word Om in classical speech is a way of respectfully and with a commitment conveying a sense of affirmation. Sometimes in Vedic rituals or other derived rituals, when an initiate or someone is speaking to the affirmation of a vow that they're asked to make, or a action that they're committing themselves to perform, then they'll respond by saying Om. So Om has this sense of affirmation and commitment. So if Om itself, which is conceived as the seed of the whole of the Shastra, is fundamentally an affirmation of the existence of the Paratattva and of the worthiness of seeking experience of the Paratattva, then the sound of the flute is sort of, the silver lining in that, or the finest essence of why that affirmation is there, and what is relishable and fulfilling in responding to that affirmation with commitment to the path that the Shastra teaches, such that one can reach this state of experience. So another sense of the verse is also that while Gyanis or Karmis may adhere to parts of the Vedas or the Upanishads, or engage in yogis, may meditate on Om, while the followers of other paths may highly adore these things, to say, may the sound of your flute create delight for us, is as though to say, we're not interested in the path of karma or yoga or gyan. We're only interested in Krishna bhakti. We're only interested in our Ishta Devata, Sri Krishna of Braja. We only long to have the experience of his Madhurya, to hear the sound of his flute, to have the opportunity to reciprocate and answer that call, so to speak. So to create delight for us, and one ultimately alludes to having the opportunity to be there in that dham, to hear that flute song, and to come running in response to it, as we discussed in relation to earlier verses on the topic. Okay, and now the final citation I have is as follows. Tava Krishna Keli Madhuri Murali Hitamahitam Chasputam Vimo Hayati Ekam Sudharmi Suhrida Visha Vishamena Param Dhavina. O Krishna, your flute play vividly bewilders the well-disposed and the ill-disposed. One, that is the well-disposed, with a sound that is friendly like a wave of nectar, and causes one to faint out of bliss. And the other, the ill-disposed, with a sound that is dreadful like poison, and causes one to faint out of fear. So, similar to the verse before last, where the asuras, the sound of the flute has one effect on the asuras, another effect on the gopis. So similarly here to the residents of Braja who adore the sound of Krishna's flute, then it's like a wave of nectar over them. But for those who are opposed to him, then it's the opposite. It can leave them fear-stricken and so on. So the same, just as Krishna himself appeared to so many in different ways. When he entered the arena of Kamsa, he looked like death to someone, Cupid to someone else, the hometown hero to someone else, etc. Then, so also the sound of his flute, the same sound, the same raga can have opposite effects. So, to conclude and get back to Sarvabhauma's verse specifically, we'll look at the rest of the commentary. The intent of the rhetorical question in the verse under discussion, quote, "For me, what is the use of talk of nirvana?" is thus that the form of mukti, which is the ultimate desired object of the followers of the path of Gyan, that is immersion in unqualified Brahman, Brahmasayuja mukti, is certainly not the author's desired object. Rather, the author feels such intense raga, or attachment to Krishna, and thereby to the sound of his flute, that he feels great eagerness, or otsukya, which is the theme of this section, even to be perpetually reborn within the realm of samsara, if thereby he can somehow have the fortune of hearing the sweet sound of Krishna's flute. Thus, it is not that the author does not long to serve his Ishtadevata Sri Krishna in his abode of Goloka and experience his sweetness in full there. In other words, by saying, "Oh, let me birth after birth hear the sound of your flute," it doesn't mean that he actually desires to be in samsara, that his preference is to be there. That's not the reason he's saying, "Let me hear it birth after birth." Rather, he wants to hear the flute as Krishna plays it, where Krishna plays it, in the fullness of the experience of hearing it in its native space, as a participant, as a member, so to speak, of that domain. But rather, the author deeply longs for this, and with his intent in the verse under discussion is to convey that deep longing. Sorry, that should just be deep. By saying that he is ready to undergo any and all hardships in samsara perpetually, if by doing so he shall somehow be able to at least drink in with his ears the nectar of Sri Krishna's flute songs. That is, he is expressing readiness to undergo great hardship, even for the sake of a slight experience of Sri Krishna's sweetness, to convey that he feels profound eagerness to experience in full eternal... Oh gosh, sorry, this is redundant, I have to fix this. To experience in full Krishna's sweetness, or the experience of Krishna's sweetness had by those in his divine abode, of Goloka. Sorry, that sentence is not properly looked after. Anyway, what we want to draw out of Sarvabhauma's point here is that he's expressing eagerness by expressing readiness to undergo even indefinite, unfavorable, or difficult circumstances if that would allow even a slight experience of his cherished object. So by saying that, what he's actually saying is that he wants to experience the object in full, there in Goloka, in the company of Krishna, as his parikara, etc. But because he so deeply and truly cherishes that, and of course, why does he cherish that? Because that's how Krishna is best served. That's how Krishna is ultimately pleased. With this in mind, he desires that, and then thinking, and if I'm unfit or it's not for me to yet have all of that, then let me, at the very least, have some experience thereof. And if I have to undergo perpetual hardship to have even that slight experience, then I'm ready for that. I have full eagerness even for that. In this way, we can see the strength of the eagerness that he wants to convey in the verse. So, that's all I have on that one. And I'll come to the next one, but I don't think we'll have time to get through all this discussion on this one. Anyway, I'll just touch upon it briefly, but maybe we'll save the commentary for next time, because this one we get a little technical and I think it'll be easier to discuss in one go. So the verse itself, however, is this. Asvadyam pramada racha aradachadamiva shravyam navam jalpitam balaya iva drishamuttamavadu lavanya lakshmi riva prodgoshyam chiraviprayukta vanita sandeshavani vame naivedyam charitam charupamanisham Shri Krishna namastute. O Shri Krishna, may your offerings be for me pleasing to taste, like the lips of a beautiful young woman. Your deeds pleasing to hear, like the new speech of a young wife. Your figure pleasing to see, like the beauty of the loveliness of an excellent young bride. And your name pleasing to proclaim, like the words in a message from a long-separated lover. So the commentator takes this, that a Sakya Rasa Bhakta offers this prayer to convey his eagerness for the experience of Krishna's prasad, Krishna's lila, Krishna's figure, and Krishna's name. So as a worldly person may find great pleasure in the lips of a beautiful young woman, let me feel such pleasure, or somewhat comparable pleasure, in honoring your prasad. Let me have pleasure in hearing about your lila. Let me have pleasure in beholding your figure. Let me have pleasure in proclaiming your name. So why does the poet refer to these aspects of worldly attachment and pleasure, which are typically considered quite utterly distinct from the spiritual experience and pleasure and attachment found in the path of bhakti? Why would he use these using such vivid and direct language to describe his spiritual aspirations? So this is an interesting subject matter, and something that Jiva Gosvami has given some very nice discussion of, or discussion related to such subject, throughout the Sandarbhas. So in our next reading, I'll leave it here as a cliffhanger. We can dive into that and see how a very significant, subtle, but very central feature of what attachment to Krishna, what priti for Krishna actually is, can be drawn out and appreciated by poetry such as the verse we've read now. So I'll end a little briefly so we can have that discussion in full next time. So I'll conclude here. If anyone has any comment, question, correction, or otherwise, please feel free to share. All right, then I'll leave it at that for the evening, and we'll resume again in our next reading. Vaishnavebhyo namo nama. Jai Shri Guru, Jai Shri Gaur, Jai Jai Shri Shri Radhe Shyam.
Thank you.